Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today I have one that has taken me admittedly a while to get to, and that is the HiFiMan Sundara open back version. I have previously reviewed the closed back version, and I will put a link to that in the description below. This was sent to me by HiFiMan. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation of it. And they have made no attempt to influence my opinion one way or another on this piece. So thanks, HiFiMan, for sending this over for review. This is a $299 US open back planar magnetic around the ear headphone. Right, and so it has gotten some pretty wide accolades out there in the reviewing community and in the audiophile community at large. So I'm going to have a few words to say about it right after shameless self-promotion. So let's do that. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. As I mentioned right before shameless self-promotion, this is a headphone now that has been around a while. And it has received pretty widespread praise in the audiophile community. And in many ways, I kind of feel like in this particular case, I don't have a ton to add to this headphone itself that hasn't already been said. So what I'm probably going to do, what I am going to do in this review is I will make a few comments about this headphone in and of itself. And then I'll talk a little bit about where I think it fits into what, for lack of a better term, I will just call a budget enthusiast headphone category right now, which to me is probably in that like $200 to $500 kind of price range, right around in there, where we have stepped up a little bit above the at the true entry level, but we have not crossed into what many would think of as the insane, although some are still going to think, many who are not audiophiles anyway are still going to think that $200 for a set of headphones is insane, but we know better, right? Okay, anyway. So the Sundara itself, again, open back, planar magnetic, full-size headphone that comes in. A lot of online retailers right now are selling this right at $300 US, and I will link to a couple of them down below. It has a rated sensitivity of 32 ohms, a rated impedance of 32 ohms with a rated sensitivity of 94 decibels. HiFiMan does not specify whether that decibel is per milliwatt or per 1 volt input. It's one of those two. But it's not an inordinately hard headphone to drive with those numbers. It's not super sensitive, not overly difficult either with numbers like that. We see that it comes from HiFiMan's, more round shape and cup designed there, and it has this what their entry-level suspension strap headband system there as well. We have the standard HiFiMan dual 3.5 millimeter cable entry on the cup, so just about any standard dual 3.5 millimeter headphone cable will work with this just fine. The inside area on the pads there, we see that we have this like polyester, or I'm not quite sure what material this is on the inside, with the probably faux leather here on the outside of the pads. There is a slight forward angle to the pads, so they do sit on your head kind of, like this, all that, which helps with sound staging and that sort of thing. Overall, they are not like fantastically well made, but I don't find the build quality poor. The one thing that I have noticed about the build is that they do just kind of, they rattle a little bit, okay? Especially in this, this rotating motion in the cup. So there's just a little bit of noise in there, but once they're on your head, you don't hear any of that. There's no squeaking or anything like that. The comfort is pretty good. You saw there's not huge ear area like HiFiMan's egg-shaped designs. These guys, the Edition XS, which I will say more about in a minute, with the big egg-shaped cup, which can fit enormous ears. This isn't quite like quite that size. For my average size earlobes, I do feel just a little bit of pressure down here at the bottom. Nothing major. Otherwise, I find the comfort pretty good. It's a little bit tighter clamping than a lot of HiFiMans I've had experience with, but it's not super tight either. It's not like an Audeze or a Sennheiser kind of clamp by any means. Okay, on that. So I don't have a ton of complaints about the build or the comfort or anything like that for a $300 unit. So quickly, let's get into sound. Test gear that I used for this. I tried the Schiit Modi Multibit 2, which I got in for review. I used that as a DAC a bunch for this. And I also used the Musician Draco, which I am working on a review for a bit, and the SMSL VMV D1SE, which is a mouthful of letters and numbers, which I am working on a review for. And then amps that I tried this with would be the Schiit Asgard 3, the Lake People G111 Mark II, and a little bit on my Bioelectric HPA V281 just to see like what it would do scaling up. Okay, on that sort of thing too. So that was test gear really quick on that. The sound here, because again, this thing is talked about a lot, and if you're just needing to hear it from me, which first of all, I appreciate that level of respect, but I will say that, yeah, it's good. Okay, it is an excellent all-around performer at $300 US. I mean, really strong. It has a bit of a neutral, slightly bright kind of tuning from a frequency response standpoint. So it's not super bright or overly forward in the treble like some HiFiMans can be, particularly on gear that doesn't control treble very well. But okay, but there is just a little bit of added like air and a little bit of upper treble kind of presence and energy just slightly above neutral. Since the rest of the frequency range is tuned pretty neutrally, that does create just a kind of a neutral, bright kind of sound. Now, it's not particularly warm. I don't find it lacking in the warmth region or in the bass so much, but there's not going to be a whole lot of warmth, and it's not a super bassy presentation either. It's just, again, going more for neutrality there. So some people who prefer a warmer signature might find this a little bit on the thin side. But again, we're coming back to it's just mostly a neutral, slightly bright kind of presentation. It has a fair amount of detail retrieval to it. I mean, it's fairly resolving for a $300 headphone. Lots of good information and even texturing in the sound in there, which was great. It scaled up pretty well with gear, and you could hear more texturing and more resolution come out with like higher end source gear and all of that too. So, I mean, again, it's got a fair amount of resolution in there. The sound stage is not huge. It's not like, again, it's not going to throw a huge stage like its egg-shaped brothers do, but it's reasonably big with good imaging and separation within that sound field and all of that. The timbre is also pretty good. It's fairly realistic. It's not like over the moon, out of this world good. It doesn't reach out and grab you at timbral accuracy through the mids like a Sen 600 or 650 will do. Okay, but it's strong. All right, it's like, to me, what this headphone kept coming back to is that it's just a really well-balanced, strong performer at $300 US, just rock solid. Okay, it's not super picky about what kind of music you put in it. That little bit of extra treble bite to it can get fatiguing for some with a lot of really aggressive and poorly recorded treble focused music. Okay, so that's something that you should keep an eye on or an ear out for if that matters to you. Okay, but I didn't notice it really struggling with any particular music genre, save for really, really bassy music. If you're into really hard-hitting and low-rumbling EDM or dubstep, see, some things like hip-hop and all of that, there may not be quite enough bass presence and rumble for some here, at least not in the stock tuning. There is pretty good bass extension, but it's going to be a little bit on the leaner side in terms of presence there too. Now, it does respond well to equalization if you want to EQ that up a little bit. I used my Schiit Loki Mini equalizer, added a little bit of bass to it, and it handled it just fine. Okay, so that's an option out there if you want it. So what I would like to do now then is talk a little bit more about where I think the Sundara Open here fits in that kind of budget enthusiast category in headphones right now. So again, this is roughly speaking, call it $200-ish to $500-ish, fuzzy boundaries, okay? But just a little bit higher than the true entry level, not shoot the moon, okay, kind of good. So we'll get into some comparisons here. I did this review of the Sundara Closed back in the fall of 2022, and some folks were like, well, what about the comparison with the open version? So let's talk about that briefly. The open version is much more neutrally tuned than this. The closed has a little bit of wonky mid-range going on, some uneven tonal balance through the mids, which can make it a little bit shouty, honky, nasally sounding, and push some brass instruments and that sort of thing forward a fair amount that I do not notice with the closed version, or excuse me, the open version. I think they are both fairly good in the treble, fairly evenly matched in the treble, and then the bass on the closed version is just a little bit more pronounced and present than the open version, which is pretty common when you're talking about, you know, differences between open and closed headphones. I think the open gives you a little bit more accurate imaging and separation in the soundstage as well, but not like hugely so. For me, the big difference between these two comes down to the tuning, and while I enjoy the more dynamic, punchy, and present bass on the closed back as compared to the open back, just the tonal accuracy through the mid-range on the closed is just not particularly good, and that's a real turnoff for me. But it's pretty strong on the open version, so overall I much prefer the open version sonically than the closed version. So there's that comparison for those who were interested. I brought out my mass drop Sennheiser HD6XX, which keeps changing in price. I think it's around $240 or $260, something like that, as of the filming of this video. And then my Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm, which is still right around $200, I think, which I have dual entry cable modded, detachable cable modded on my own. And then I have a couple other HiFiMans. I have the Deva Pro here, which is $200 if you buy just the headphone without their blue mini dongle. And I have the Edition XS from HiFiMan, which is $500, and it's the egg-shaped line here. And I'll talk about just like how this headphone kind of fits in there. I have not heard every $200 to $500 headphone out there. The other one that I heard recently was the Sivga SV023, which I can link to down below as well, which is $450, I think, something like that. Okay. So anyway, I've heard a smattering in there, and I will say that the Sundara is just, again, even in this field that I just showed you, plus the Sivga, is just still an excellent all-around performer at $300. Most of the headphones that I just showed you have some real strengths to them, but they have some real drawbacks to them as well, which some of them are technical drawbacks and some of them are going to be very much preference drawbacks that I don't think are going to show up as strongly with the Sundara Open as it does with some of these others. So let's kind of put that framing in mind here as we talk about these in a little bit more detail. Let's start with the DT880, just because it was the one that my hand landed on when I grabbed for a headphone. Okay? So dynamic driver. You will hear the difference here between a dynamic driver presentation and a planar magnetic driver presentation, where you get a little bit more of a point source kind of sound from the DT880, and you get a little bit more, I don't want to call it wall of sound because I think that sends the wrong message in terms of like how it does things spatially, but like the origin of the sound, where the sound is coming from, just sounds like the sound is radiating from a bigger area, which just kind of creates this bigger presentation to it generally, okay, between these two. So while the DT880 still has a really wide sound stage for a headphone of this price and of this build and style, it doesn't quite have just the bigness and scale that the Sundara can pull off more so than this one can. Now I think with proper source gear, the DT880 will best the Sundara in terms of treble timbre and treble upper frequency detail retrieval. They are about even on mid-range timbre, and I think they have fairly similar-ish bass presentations insofar as they both extend really well and have a fair amount of physicality to the bass, although I think the DT880 might be a little bit punchier. Okay, but they are a little bit lean at times. Now, as far as the drawbacks go, the DT880 I find to be much more source pairing picky, particularly with amps. And you can spend some serious money to really hear how wonderful the treble timbre on it can be. Whereas the Sundara just is a little bit better performing with lower priced source gear, I think. It's a little bit more forgiving in the treble. It doesn't get as sharp or as sibilant as frequently as this one does. And it's less fatiguing a lot because of that too. I think the Sundara also in its stock tuning is a little bit more like rock and metal friendly, where I think the DT880 is just a little bit too aggressive in the treble for those music genres for a lot of, fairly poorly recorded rock and metal, which is, plentiful. All right. So that's a quick comparison with that one there as well. The 6XX. Similar difference there between, again, dynamic driver versus planar driver. So that perceived size difference is there. But the 6XX also just has a much narrower and more intimate soundstage and presentation to it than the Sundara does generally. I think the 6XX has a little bit more punch and a little bit more slam in the bass, although it does not extend in the bass quite as well as the Sundara does. It also doesn't have the upper frequency extension that the Sundara does. But the thing that the 6XX just continues to do so much better than just about anything else at the price point is just have that amazingly lush and natural mid-range timbre. Still, anywhere near this price, it's still just so hard to beat at that. And so it has the distinct advantage over the Sundara in that way. But again, the Sundara is in no way poor in mid-range timbre. It's just not nearly as lifelike or as natural or as organic as the 6XX is. Okay. Deva Pro, which is HiFiMan's kind of $200 planar magnetic headphone, which is also wired up to accept their Blue Mini dongle if you want a wireless open back planar solution. You don't. But if you wanted that, here it is. Okay. The build on the Deva Pro doesn't feel nearly as solid as this. You can see it has this newer style headband, which is not nearly as comfortable as the suspension strap headband on this one. And this one, the Deva Pro does not clamp very hard, so it slides around on the head a lot more. I really like the sound of the Deva Pro at $200. I think it's got a very neutral tuning to it, plays well with a wide range of music. But it is not quite as refined or as resolving in its sound as the Sundara is. And it's a little bit more forward in the upper mids, so it doesn't have quite as strong of mid-range tonal balance or timbre as the Sundara does through that range. So I overall prefer the Sundara sonically to this, just because again it's a little bit smoother, a little bit more refined, a little bit more resolving, and a little bit more tonally accurate in my opinion. So then the Edition XS, let's talk about that one. $500, so $200 more than this one. You do get more resolution out of the Edition XS as far as sound goes. You get bigger driver area, so you get more bass presence, more sub-bass presence and rumble, a little bit more slam. The Sundara might come across as having a little bit more like mid-bass punch. Okay, but the XS certainly has more sub-bass slam. And I don't think that the punch, the mid-bass punch on the XS is less than the Sundara. It's just maybe masked a little bit because you get that punch and then the more body with the slam coming with it. So the punch in the mid-bass doesn't stand out quite as much on the XS as it does, comparatively speaking, to the Sundara. Okay. And then you also, like with this egg-shaped design here, you get HiFiMan's egg-shaped lines, like just huge scale, right? Just grandiose, enormous kind of soundstage that is just big and grand. That's like how I best I can describe it there. That this being a smaller driver area and a little bit different cup shape does not quite capture. And so, but I do think the XS is just a little bit more U-shaped in its frequency response. So it has that added sub bass, but at times I thought it had just a little bit more sibilance in the treble than even the Sundara does. So that's the one tiny drawback. Rarely a problem, but a little bit noticeable. And then it has this, like the XS has this newer style headband that's not the suspension strap and is again nowhere near as comfortable as the Sundara is for just the way it fits on the head and for long periods of listening and that sort of thing too. So, summing all of that up, what does that mean where I think the Sundara fits in kind of that budget enthusiast category of headphones? And honestly, I think it should be on your list to check out. If you are looking for an open back headphone in that price range, it is just really strong across the board. Does a lot of things well, does very few things poorly. It might be just a little bit bass lean for someone who likes a lot of warmth, or for someone who wants a lot of slam, a lot of rumble, and that sort of thing. Okay, you can EQ in some of that with equalization if you are an EQer. I'm not really. But I still found it fairly good, like good bass extension, just not a ton of rumble or all that. But I still enjoyed it for the vast majority of genres of music that I listen to. And I think it's just a good, solid all-arounder that absolutely deserves your attention if you are looking for a headphone, you know, between $250, $400, $500. Definitely consider this one. It's got a lot going for it. All right, so we'll leave it there. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the HiFiMan Sundara open back version. And where I think it fits in the market of $200 to $500 headphones. So again, I'm Wave Theory. Thanks for watching this video. Please like if you have not liked this video yet. Please subscribe to my channel if you have not done that yet. Please check out my PayPal, where you can make a one-time donation to help support the channel. And please check out my Patreon, where you can support me on a monthly basis, talk to me on Discord, and get early access to my videos and that sort of thing. So again, thanks for watching, everyone, and enjoy the music.